There is so much talk about women's hormonal health, which is great. But even though it's a bigger part of the conversation, most women are left even more confused about what it means for them and what to do about it, which is not so great. This confusion ends now. An award-winning German nutrition scientist created a powerful herbal formula called Hormone Harmony, which combines 12 powerful adaptogens into one single capsule. Each of these ingredients is carefully selected based on scientific evidence, and it's been proven effective in clinical studies for women of various ages and hormonal profiles. And Happy Mammoth, the company that produces Hormone Harmony, is famous for its zero-compromise policy. No GMOs, artificial fillers or flavors, or any other junk. Only science-backed ingredients in amounts that are clinically proven. The company surveyed over 1,500 women to see how Hormone Harmony helped them, and the results are mind-blowing. 86% of women started losing weight, 77% say it improved their mood, and 100% said they're feeling like themselves again. Hormone Harmony has over 50,000 raving reviews from women all over the world, with 98% of them saying they'd gladly recommend it to their friends and family. For a limited time, you can get 15% off on your entire first order at happymammoth.com. Just use the code HAPPYME, HAPPYME, at checkout. That's code HAPPYME at happymammoth.com for 15% off your entire first order.
This episode is brought to you by Polestar. There's only one true way to experience the all-electric luxury SUV Polestar 3, and that's to take a test drive. It can go from 0 to 60 in as little as 4.8 seconds with the dynamic handling of a sports car. But to truly understand how it commands the road, you need to be behind the wheel. Up to 350 miles of range, the 3D surround sound system by Bowers & Wilkins. It's all something you have to experience to believe. So book your test drive for Polestar 3 today at polestar.com.
Hello and welcome to a bonus episode of Vulgar History. This is where we talk about Canadian history. My name is Anne Foster, and this is a feminist women's history comedy podcast. And on the regular feed of Vulgar History, we talk about all kinds of different countries. And I'm Canadian, and so sometimes I just like to feature a Canadian story. And this episode is dropping on Canada Day, which you may or may not know is July 1st. And so I'm telling a story about a Canadian heroine who, it's interesting, when I was researching this, I'm like, well, I basically know this story. I know it's Laura Secord. Like, I know the story of Laura Secord, people who grew up in the 80s and 90s and 2000s. Like, we all saw the Canadian Heritage Minute. We know she went on this walk. We know she sent a message. And then when I started reading up about her, I was like, oh, there's stuff I didn't know, including what is the connection between Laura Secord, the person, and Laura Secord, the very famous and successful chocolate business that is in every mall in Canada. Anyway, I also wanted to say, there's going to be Canadian history special episodes of this podcast, I think on a regular basis. If you see the image that, I'm serious about this, the image that I have set up for this mini series within Vulgar History, Vulgar History, Canadian History, I hired an artist, a Canadian artist named Colleen Arcturus McIsaac. And there's imagery in there representing all kinds of Canadiana that's important to me and reflects all the parts of this country that we all live in. This problematic country that I call home and that I'm glad I live in compared to other places in the world right now. So today we're talking about Laura Secord. And the main sources I found about this, actually I was surprised. There wasn't a lot of book-length biographies about her, but I got a lot of information just from the Dictionary of Canadian Biography entry by Ruth Mackenzie, as well as from Wikipedia and honestly, my own memory. So let's get into it. This is an Ontario-based story. This is a story of white-on-white violence. And yeah, so as we go, I'll give some commentary, but we're talking about Laura Secord. Oh yeah, I wanted to just mention, purely a coincidence, I was already planning on doing this Canada Day episode when the latest escalation in the ongoing tariff thing between America and Canada was just tweeted or whatever. And just so you know, for people who are not in Canada and don't know, ever since the whole tariff nonsense started in Canada was like elbows up, which I explained in a previous Canadian history bonus episode. I was just in a store today and there's Canada flags, so you can see what are the Canadian products. And, people are just kind of like supporting Canadian over American products. There's signs up being like, if there's a tariff impacting the price, there's a big T on the shelf. Like, we haven't slowed down in our like rage-filled patriotism. And that really kind of echoes part of what we're talking about in this story. So the woman who would become known as Laura Secord was born Laura Ingersoll, September 13th, 1775, in Great Barrington, Massachusetts. So she's born just at the beginning of the American Revolution era. She would come of age during what would be like the Haitian Revolution era, the French Revolution era, which we've been talking about on the main podcast here as well. So, like us, unprecedented times. So she was born in Great Barrington, Massachusetts. So in what would become the United States of America. So she was the eldest child of Elizabeth Dewey and Thomas Ingersoll. Thomas was like a second or third generation living in America person. His career was he worked as a hatter. Hats were really big at this time, so it was a lucrative career. And that made him enough money that he was buying property. He started farming and stuff, and to support his growing family, because he and his wife Elizabeth had several children. Laura was the oldest one of them. When the American Revolution started, he fought on the side of the American Revolution, sometimes called the Patriot side, sometimes called the Rebel side. And this kept him away from home because he was in the militia and there was a war going on. So he did well in the militia. He rose to the rank of captain. And when the American Revolution ended, which took several years, he was appointed a magistrate and was able to return to Great Barrington and to his wife and his children, and then more children were born. And then when Laura was 8 years old, shortly after her father returned, frankly, her mother Elizabeth died. And Thomas, her dad, very quickly married again, as people did then, and I think people still do now. If they're widowed and then have children to raise, it's just like, I just need someone to raise these kids, basically. So he married a woman called Mercy Smith, and that is who raised Laura Secord for much of her childhood. Mercy Smith taught her stepchildren how to read and how to do needlework. She didn't have any children of her own from before. And she and Thomas did not have any children together before Mercy Smith also died of tuberculosis. And at this point, Laura was 14 years old. Thomas, again, married right away to a woman named Sally Backus, who is a widow with a daughter named Nancy. So that's like, Laura's got a stepsister now. So there's now 5 girls in the household. Thomas and Sally had 4 more daughters and 3 more sons. So it's like a big old family living in oldie times America. But in the post-American Revolution era, Thomas, he didn't care for how the Loyalists, which is the name for people who fought on the British side, how they were being treated. Like after the American Revolution side, the rebels, aka patriots, when they won and there's a Declaration of Independence and whatnot, a lot of Loyalists, like British redcoat people, fled, but a lot of them stayed because like that's where they were from. They'd lived there for a long time. And the people who stayed were being persecuted. But also his hat business not thriving, his farms not thriving. Things were not going well because in the wake of this war that just happened and how many people had died and stuff. So he knew that he was not going to be super prosperous anytime soon, staying in this place with like all the people around him not really able to buy hats, etc. He had his own debts. And at this time, England, or Britain, the British Crown, was encouraging white people to move to what was called then Upper Canada, which is kind of like Toronto, Ottawa area now. You might think, but that's not upper. Upper Canada is, one might think, further north, like the Northwest Territories. That would be what you would call maybe, or Northern Ontario. No, Upper Canada is Toronto, Ottawa area. So Britain was like, hey, Americans, why don't you go to Upper Canada, clear some land, like build some towns, like let's make Britain great again. And so Thomas was like, I think this is the move for me right now. Like he hadn't fought on the British side during the American Revolution, but he's like, I think this is how I can make some money from my like Duggar-sized family. So he and 4 men who were his friends pooled the resources together. They filled out the paperwork to get a land grant, which they received. They received 66,000 acres in the Thames River Valley. And they founded a place that they called Oxford on the Thames, which is later and still now known as Ingersoll, Ontario. And the contract that they signed said, like, we will found this place, and we promise that in exchange, we will populate it with 40 other families within the next 7 years. Which I guess they're just going to do by word of mouth and making such a cool place. Lots of people are going to want to go there. And so Thomas, his daughter, Laura Secord, their caravan of children, and his wife Sally all moved up to Upper Canada in 1795. So while there, like while he and his associates, and they hired people and stuff to clear the land, Thomas supported his huge family by running a tavern just so that they were getting some income while the land was being cleared and stuff. And they lived in Queenston at this time. Like, they couldn't live in Oxford on the Thames, aka Ingersoll, because that, like, it wasn't a city yet. It was just trees. So they're living in a place called Queenston, running a tavern. But then 2 years into this whole situation, like, he had promised that in the next 7 years, he would make this prosperous town. But his contract was canceled 2 years later for not having all of its conditions fulfilled. And so he's just like, what the fuck? Like, what am I going to do? And so he moved most of his family to a place called Credit River, close to where present-day Toronto is. And he opened an inn. Like, this is a skill he had. I guess he was personable. He's good with books, although maybe not because he had all these debts. And they just ran the inn there. That's what he was doing. After he died in 1812, his wife, Sally, continued to run the inn. But I said most of the family moved there. Laura did not. Laura stayed in Queenston to get married. And the person she married was named James Secord. So James Secord was the son of a loyalist who had served on the British side of the American Revolution. Like, James had not. He was a young person, but his dad had been on the redcoat side of the American Revolution and then fled up to Upper Canada in the wake of that. And so they lived in a house built in a place called St. David's. I'm saying a lot of place names in case people listening are familiar with that area and live in one of those towns, because wouldn't it be delightful for you to hear your town's name said on this podcast? Anyway, so they lived in this house in St. David's. The first floor was a shop. So, like, this is an entrepreneurial family, like running inns, taverns, and a shop. Laura had her first child named Mary in 1799. And then later on, well, actually, pretty short succession, she had several more children. Charlotte, Harriet, Charles Badeau, and Apollonia. Great names. But then, her first child was born in 1799. Time is passing. They're running their little shop. They're living in Queenston. Her dad is, not too far away in Toronto, running his inn. And then 1812. A thing happened that we now call the War of 1812. So this is not a war-based podcast. Like, honestly, we're here just to talk about Laura Secord and what did she do. So to get this over with as quickly as possible, it was a war between the United States and Britain, but it was a war between the United States, like the people who were there, and the people who lived in what is now Canada, who were British people. The sorts of people who like to talk about technicalities of war-based things, which is not me, are like, it wasn't a war between the United States and Canada because Canada did not become a country until 1867, and this was 1812, blah, blah. It's the place that is now Canada. It's the same way that if you're looking at American history and it's like, oh, they landed on Plymouth Rock. Like, okay, but it wasn't American then, so why are you studying that in American history? Like, it was Canada. Just at that point, Canada was a British colony. And so the war, which might sound familiar to you, was based on where the border was between Upper Canada and the United States. And the United States wanted to take over the land around like Niagara Falls, like again, that like Upper Canada area. And Canada was like, fuck you, no. And so, fun fact, during this war, which is called the War of 1812, but it lasted a couple years. Later on in the war, the Canadian side, aka the British side, stormed into Washington and burned down the city, including burning down the White House and the Capitol building. So that is a thing that, a proud Canadian moment. That some would say, well, it wasn't really Canada, they were British people. But like, in this time, in our unprecedented times, I think it's sort of a nice memory of the time that the people who now living in what Canada is now, our ancestors, went to Washington and fucking burned down the White House. Like, I love that French Revolution adjacent energy. Anyway, So the war started 1812, and Laura's husband, James Secord, enlisted to fight on the British side / Canadian side. His militia unit was responsible for doing things like moving guns and ammunition during military engagements. So it sounds like he wasn't like out there shooting himself, but they were sort of like support type people. So this all started like in the summer, like June 1812, October 1812. Americans landed near Queenston, which is where Laura and her children and James were living. So Laura took her children and they took shelter in a farmhouse about a mile out of town. James was still off with the militia, so she's just like single parenting at this moment. A battle happened that is called the Battle of Queenston Heights. And during this battle, I guess James was out there trying to deliver, guns and stuff, and he was actually shot twice. And this is olden days bullets. So it was, I don't know, bullets are always bad, but just so you can picture the sort of wound he would have had. He was shot once in the shoulder and once in the knee and survived. So after the battle ended, when the guns fell silent, Laura had heard about this and, she knew that this battle had happened. She's like, how's my husband? Where's James? So she returned to Queenston and discovered that American soldiers had ransacked her house and presumably the store as well. And then she also heard that James had been wounded. And so she was just like, she's not a person who stops to think about things. She's a doer. She's a goer. And she just like charged right out to the battlefield to find him. Like, where's my husband? What's going on? She found him, and with the help of somebody, another man just called a gentleman, brought him back home so she could tend to his injuries, which she did because those were skills she apparently had. Maybe a lot of people had those skills during this sort of frontier era. And so she tended to him in the immediate aftermath of his injuries. And when he was a bit better and able to travel, she took him and the children to St. David's, which is the city, another city where they spent some time. And so James's relatives were there and they spent the winter there with his relatives. At this point, so the war had been going on now for about a year, significantly affecting Laura's life, obviously. And so May 1813, like a year after the war started, the American army launched an attack across the Niagara River, and Queenston and the whole Niagara area fell to the Americans. This was the sort of war where the Americans would get like a little bit of land on the Canadian side, and then the Canadians would get it back and take a bit of American. It was not significant amounts of land are not being changed because they were very equally balanced armies, is my understanding of this as a not war historian. Anyway, so men of military age in Queenston were sent as prisoners of war to the US. But James was not sent because he was still recuperating from his injuries. And not only that, because the Americans took over this land, it's like, well, where are they going to live? They're not from here. So they were billeted, which means they just became house guests of people in Queenston, including at the Secord's house. So suddenly they had these like house guests that were also enemy soldiers living with them and all of her young children and her husband recuperating from bullet wounds. So it's like quite a situation for Laura to be living through. But she was smart, she was canny, and she was clever, and she kept an ear open to hear what the American soldiers were talking about. And on the evening of June 21st, 1813, she overheard these soldiers, her unwanted house guests, were talking about these soldiers, like, you know what? I'm glad that they were bad at being spies, because that's why Laura Secord could become a hero. So they were just like literally in her house talking about, hey, so like there's this surprise attack the Americans are going to do. They're going to go to this place called Beaver Dams, where the lieutenant was James Fitzgibbon. And so the Americans were talking out loud, like, we're going to go Beaver Dams, we're going to go capture James Fitzgibbon. And then by capturing him, and we would get some more territory in this like Niagara Peninsula area. And so Laura's like, I need to go and tell him, I need to go find James Fitzgibbons and give him the heads up that like he's about to be attacked by these Americans. James was not able to travel at this time, still recuperating from his like olden days gunshot injuries, understandably. And so Laura, who again, she's just like, she's a doer. She's like, well, fuck this, I'm going to go myself. So she decided to go to walk all the way to Fitzgibbon to warn him that this was going to happen. How far away was he? It was about 12 miles away. So she set out early in the morning, sneaking away, like walking. There were some people wrote about this later and said that she brought a cow with her. So in case it looked suspicious, she'd be like, oh, I'm just walking my cow, which apparently would make it all less suspicious. But she never said she brought a cow. But I just wanted to mention that there could have been a cow. Some other retellings of this said, and she went out in bare feet. It's like, girl, no, she wore shoes. Like, what are you talking about? Maybe one of her shoes came off or something. But anyway, she set out early in the morning for this 12-mile walk. Well, technically, the walk, it was about 12 miles if you just walked straight there. But she wanted to avoid running into like American guards or anyone who might stop her. So instead, she walked like more circuitously a distance of 20 miles, which would be about 32 kilometers in this more roundabout route. At one point, she stopped in St. David's and she was joined by her niece, Elizabeth Secord. But Elizabeth did not have the endurance and the stamina and the determination. Elizabeth became exhausted and had to stop to rest. And so Laura continued on her own. And this is like, it's not just like she doesn't have a map. It's like woods. Like there's not roads. But she's just like confident. She's the Moana of this time. I don't know, I was going to say she was reading the stars, but she couldn't because it was daytime. So she just kind of knew the way she was going because she was following this creek. And she knew that the creek would lead to where Fitzgibbon probably, hopefully was. And now for a quick advertising break.
It can be overwhelming to manage a business, especially when you're first starting out. Your to-do list just keeps growing every day with new tasks, and that list can easily begin to overrun your life. Finding the right tool not only helps you out, but can simplify problems you haven't even encountered yet. And for millions of businesses, that tool is Shopify. Shopify is the commerce platform behind millions of businesses around the world, and 10% of all e-commerce in the US, from household names like Mattel and Gymshark to brands just getting started. With hundreds of ready-to-use templates, Shopify can help you easily build a beautiful online store to match your brand style. And best yet, Shopify is your commerce expert with world-class expertise in everything from managing inventory to international shipping to processing returns and beyond. If you're ready to sell, you're ready for Shopify. Turn your big business idea into with Shopify on your side. Sign up for your $1 per month trial and start selling today at shopify.com/realm. Go to shopify.com/realm. Shopify.com/realm. When it comes to makeup, I'm a less is more kind of person. I wish I had the patience to do a full face all the time, but since that's just how I am, I always make sure that the few products I am using are the best quality. And my go-to place to find those holy grails is Thrive Causemetics. Thrive Causemetics makes certified 100% vegan and cruelty-free products that you can depend on for everything from simple daily wear to show-stopping self-expression. And it's all made with clean, skin-loving ingredients, high-performance and trademarked formulas, and uncompromising standards. And it's beauty that gives back. For every product purchased, Thrive Causemetics makes a donation towards 8 major causes, including those impacted by cancer, homelessness, and social justice organizations. It feels good knowing that I can support a company dedicated to giving back to causes that matter to me. And it doesn't hurt that I'm a huge fan of their Liquid Lash Extensions mascara. It comes in 5 shades that last all day without clumping, smudging, or flaking. I really love that it looks like lash extensions, but you don't have to deal with the damaging glue or salon prices. Plus, at the end of the day, it slides right off with warm water and a washcloth. No soap required. So there's no wonder why it has over 40,000 5-star reviews, including mine. Try your new trusty favorites with an exclusive set for our listeners. New customers can get the Liquid Lash Extensions mascara and a mini-sized brilliant eye brightener at a special set price with free shipping, available at thrivecausemetics.com/thrive. Or save more with 20% off your first order at thrivecausemetics.com/thrive. That's Thrive Causemetics, CAUSEMETICS.com/thrive for 20% off your first order.
If you went on a road trip and you didn't stop for a Big Mac or drop a crispy fry between the car seats or use your McDonald's bag as a placemat, then that wasn't a road trip. It was just a really long drive. Ba-da-ba-ba-ba.
At participating McDonald's.
Empower
Jen has ordered a decadent seafood tower, king crab legs, lobster tails, and a waterfall of caviar. Pricey? You bet. But Jen worked with Empower on her savings and investment strategy and planned for splurges like these. She got good at money, so she can be a little bad. Ooh, champagne. Empower. Invest well, live a little. Start today at empower.com.
Past performance is not indicative of future returns. Investing involves risk. You may lose money. Advisory services are provided for a fee by Empower Advisory Group, LLC, EAG, a registered investment advisor with the Securities and Exchange Commission. OMG, those shrimps are really jumbo.
And we're back. At one point, she crossed the creek because there was a fallen tree had fallen, so she could use it as sort of like a makeshift bridge. And then, just as she's like, and this is what we all know from the Canadian Heritage Minute, she's exhausted. She's just been like, not just like walking this great distance in olden times, but also like being constantly on the alert that like she could be caught by American soldiers at any time. She's walking through like a war. She's so exhausted. And then she comes across an encampment of allied Mohawk warriors and she's just like, I'm on your side. Like at this point, the Mohawk were on the team British, I guess, because all the different tribes were very important in many of the battles that happened here. And some allied with the Americans and some allied with the British. And luckily for her, these were people who were on her side. And so she's like, take me to Fitzgibbons, which is what she says in the Canadian Heritage Minute. And they're like, oh yeah, we know him. So they helped her the rest of the way to Fitzgibbons headquarters. And she was like, here's what's up. Like the Americans are going to come and attack you. Like be prepared. Based on her warning. So Fitzgibbons sent a small British force and a larger contingent of Mohawk warriors out to be ready. They were ready for this attack and defeated the Americans, who were surprised. Like the Americans thought they're going to surprise them, but instead they themselves are surprised. Most of the Americans involved in this battle, which is called the Battle of Beaver Dams on June 24th, which is 3 days after Laura heard about this. Her walk, I think, took something like 32 hours. So, no, it's 32 kilometers, 17 hours, I think I saw. She walked for a very long time. Anyway, Battle of Beaver Dams happened. British side won. Americans, lots of casualties, and no mention of Secord. Laura Secord was made in reports that immediately followed the battle, which is like, we'll talk about why that is in a second. So after the war, like they had, Americans had stomped through. They'd been living in her house. Remember, the house was upstairs from this store. So the store was in ruins. Like they didn't have stuff to sell anymore. Her and James, her family, had all these kids, and they were impoverished. They didn't have money. The only thing that was getting them by was James's small pension from his time he served in the war, like dragging the cannons around. And they made a small amount of income from 200 acres of land that they happened to own. And then they had another child. Their sixth child, Laura Ann, was born in 1815. And then one more child, another daughter, Hannah, was born in 1817. So the children were so spread out. Like their oldest daughter, Mary, got married in 1816, which is like a year before Hannah was born, because Laura had started having children very young. Anyway, so their daughter, Mary, married a doctor and then moved with him to Ireland and had a child, and then Jamaica and had another child. And then her husband died of, let's say tuberculosis. And she came back with these children and to live with Laura. And this is like an extended family situation. There's a lot of people are turning to Laura for support. And so it's not just like, oh, it's me and my husband and our small children. It's like, no, it's me and our adult daughter and their children. It's like they were in dire needs of money to support all these people because no one was able to support themselves because women couldn't have jobs, etc. James and Laura both kept trying to do what they could to get some income going. So James petitioned the government in 1827 for some sort of employment, just being like, hey, I'm a loyal person to the British. I serve in the army. I got these wounds. Like, please, can you help out a veteran to get me a job? At the time, the lieutenant governor was named Peregrine Maitland, which is a great name. So he didn't offer him a position, but interestingly, he offered a position to Laura. He asked her to be in charge of a place called Brock's Monument, which I think still is a place that you can visit. So it's sort of like a museum/national park. And it's interesting that they asked Laura to be in charge of it, almost like he knew Laura was a significant person who had done something impressive that was worth rewarding. So she accepted this job. This is like 1827. And then Brock's Monument opened in 1831. So a few years later, But by that time, Peregrine Maitland was no longer the lieutenant governor. It was a different guy. And this different guy intended to give the job to a different woman. So I guess for some reason, this is a job just for a woman to do. Laura petitioned. She and her husband were big on petitioning. It's the sort of, it's like a Karen energy, brackets positive way, just like writing letters to the editor, just being like, excuse me, like the previous lieutenant governor said I could have this job. Like, please, could I please have this job? And as part of her petition, she got Fitzgibbon, the guy who she had warned in the battle. He wrote a letter being like, hey, this is Laura Secord. She totally saved the day. Like, please give her this job. I am Fitzgibbon. So this is one of the first recorded things saying that, or just in writing, confirming that Laura Secord had done this, that she had been the person who helped out. But the family continued living in poverty until eventually James was appointed registrar and then judge of the Niagara Surrogate Court. So maybe that was like the lieutenant governor hooking him up with a job. Finally, then he got a job becoming collector of customs at Chippewa, which I guess is people coming into town being like, did you buy anything in the US? Like, did you claim it all, etc.? So an okay paying job, so this huge extended family could all survive. But then he died of a stroke in 1841, leaving Laura without financial resources. She no longer, he was receiving this war pension, but she did not get a widow's pension from that. This reminds me of some stories that we talked about last year on Vulgar History, the main podcast. In the American Revolution, how a lot of people fought as soldiers in the American Revolution, and then later on as veterans were screwed over without money. I'm thinking of Deborah Sampson / Robert Shurtleff was one of the people who had to go on a speaking lecture tour because they couldn't get a pension. Anyway, but Laura is just kept writing petitions. She wrote a petition to the Governor General saying, hey, can my son Charles take over the job with the customs? My husband used to do it, but he died. But could my son do that? Then that would be a good job. But that was denied. She also she wrote a petition asking for a pension for herself, for her military service, for the fact she saved the day in this major battle. But that was also denied. She started running a school for children in her cottage for a brief period, even though she was not trained in how to be a teacher. But who was back then? I don't know. There's so many children she had raised, and her children had their children. She clearly had trained children in various things. But eventually, the school was closed because the public school system was introduced in the 1840s, and people couldn't just run random schools out of their houses anymore, but just to keep track of who's living in her house at this point. So her daughter, Harriet, now an adult, and her 2 daughters joined her after Harriet's husband died of alcohol poisoning. And then her youngest daughter, Hannah, moved in when she was widowed as well, bringing 2 daughters with her. So it's just Laura Secord, her adult daughters, her widowed adult daughters and their children just all living together in this house, trying to do what they could. And through the years, Laura continued petitioning the government for some kind of acknowledgement of her contribution to the War of 1812. Finally, in 1860, so she's 85 years old at this point, and the Prince of Wales came to visit. Still not yet Canada, but basically Canada. This is one of Queen Victoria's sons. He came over to visit Canada, and Laura Secord had she made a presentation. When I say presentation, she wrote a letter to be presented to him saying I'm Laura Secord. Here's what I did. Here's a letter from other people supporting the fact that I saved the day. I'm poverty stricken and 85 years old. And can you please give me some money for what I did? And the Prince of Wales read this and he's like, okay, cool. And he sent her an award of £100, which would be equivalent to about $12,000 today. And this was the only official recognition that she ever received during her lifetime. She died 8 years later in 1868 at age 93. And she was buried next to her husband in the Drummond Hill Cemetery in Niagara Falls. Now, today, her grave is marked by a monument with a bust on top, because now she's a famous heroine. But how did this happen when she wasn't really acknowledged at all during her life? So, Fitzgibbon himself, in his initial reports about the battle where she saved the day, He wrote he received information about the impending attack, but he did not say where he got it from or who he got it from. This is potentially because he wanted to not mention her by name to protect her family because they were at war and that might put her in danger. But he did, when she was writing that one petition, he wrote a letter being like, yeah, no, she did save the day. Totally. He wrote another one in 1820 to support one of her husband's petitions for license to operate a stone quarry. So he confirmed in these letters, these like references, like, yes, she took this long walk. She passed along this message. She truly saved the day. Her name is Laura Secord. Now, there is some contradictory information. Like, was the story as straightforward as it was? Like, clearly, she walked there and she gave him that information. But did he already have that information? A Mohawk chief named John Norton, he wrote about a loyal inhabitant brought information that the enemy intended to attack. He does not name who it was. It was probably Laura Secord. Dominique Ducharme, leader of the Caughnawaga Mohawk in the Battle of Beaver Dams, didn't mention Laura Secord in his reports, nor of receiving information from either her or Fitzgibbon about the impending attack. So one of the accounts also later said that maybe the Mohawk scouts had found this information and they told him at around the same time Laura also did. But in any case, she did a heroic thing trying to pass on this message, whether or not she was the first person to share this news or not. So she wrote 2 accounts of her walk, like again, just trying to get acknowledgement and / money. So in 1853 and then in 1861. But it's like, this happened to her decades earlier. And when you've lived through a really traumatic experience like that, like your memory could change or it could shift. So neither of her written accounts contain details that can be corroborated with military accounts of the battle, such as specific dates or details about troops. But like, okay, that doesn't mean it's not true. So, and the way that she told the story and remembered it changed throughout her life, which some people claim means that she was making it up or that she was lying about it. She never actually stated how she learned about the impending attack. So some people just sort of glean, because these Americans are staying in her house, that she heard them talking about it. But then she might have, maybe the husband heard and then told her. What Laura Secord told one of her granddaughters later on was that she had overheard the plans directly from the American soldiers, and maybe her memory shifted or changed. It could also be maybe an informant. Like maybe she didn't hear it by accident. Maybe somebody told her on purpose, knowing that she would pass this along. So there's unclear information about what actually happened. But how did she become famous? So in the 1880s, in what was then Canada, Confederation happened in 1867. So upper class women were, like, the suffrage movement was starting. Like, were wanting to have the vote, etc. And so they wanted to strengthen these women, these upper class Canadian women. They wanted to strengthen the emotional ties between Canadian women and the British Empire. They really needed to have sort of a female heroine that they could all unite behind to show, like, you know, there's been strong, powerful women here since before Confederation. Like, British people came here, including strong women, and we should get the votes, etc. And so Laura Secord's, whose story was known a little bit because of, like, this is the 1880s, and it was, like 20 years earlier that she had gotten the official recognition from the Prince of Wales. So, I mean, her daughters would have known about this. Like, people in Queenston would have known about this. Like, her story was kind of informally known. So the first product of this campaign to make Laura Secord a heroine, to sort of advance the cause of women's vote, was a play written by Sarah Ann Curzon called Laura Secord, the Heroine of 1812. And this came out in 1887. And this play was, it just brought her name. It just got more people talking about her. So suddenly people were really interested, because it's like still shortly after Canada had, like, become a country. And so there was a sort of a real appetite and excitement to really show, like, we're a country and here's our national heroes. So there was a lot of articles, and things written about Laura Secord that would fill Canadian histories and school textbooks right up to the early 1900s. And then a woman named Emma Curry, who was an early feminist, she discovered a newspaper clipping about Laura Secord. And she just was like, I want to learn everything about it. Like, very relatable to me. Somebody who's in a pre-Wikipedia era trying to learn all this stuff. So she tracked down information from Laura's still living relatives, all the way down as far as Great Barrington, where she had been born. And she published a book in 1900 called The Story of Laura Secord. And then Emma Curry later successfully petitioned, finally someone's petition works, to have a Laura Secord memorial erected in Queenston Heights. And so it was. This monument is 7 feet tall, and it was dedicated in 1901. In 1905, a portrait of Laura Secord was hung in Parliament here in Canada. So in 1913, so this is the 100-year anniversary of Laura Secord's walk. And there was, again, these Canadian patriotic feelings of this still new young country. A man named Frank O'Connor founded a business he called Laura Secord Chocolates. Frank O'Connor has nothing to do with Laura Secord. He's not a descendant. He's not a relative. He's just a guy who's oh, this is popular. This is if I was ooh, I'm going to start a new company. It's going to be called Princess Diana Chocolates because people like Princess Diana. He was just choosing a name of someone that people are excited about and made a chocolate company. And this chain, the first location opened in Toronto, and the chocolates were packaged in black boxes adorned with the profile of Laura Secord. By the 1970s, this was the largest candy retailer in Canada. Today, I would say, including for myself, the name Laura Secord is more strongly associated with the chocolate store, which is in every mall, than with the actual person. And I don't know if it's irony or tragedy or what, but the fact that Laura Secord struggled her whole life trying to get income and money and acknowledgement. And now this business that's not owned by her descendants, that has nothing to do with her except her name is on it, is doing really well for a lot of people making money who are not her. So Laura Secord's Queenston homestead was restored in the late 20th century and given to the Niagara Parks Commission, and now it operates as a museum/gift shop. And if you want to walk the walk that she did, take a cow with you, put on shoes or not, the Laura Secord Legacy Trail is a route that you can hike. So it covers the 32-kilometer route of the journey that she took from Queenston over to Fitzgibbon's house, where she delivered the message. The Great Barrington in Massachusetts Historic District Commission made October 18th, 1997, Laura Secord Day, and dedicated a plaque in her honor at the site of where her father's house used to be, which is now the Mason Library in Great Barrington. And in Canada, the goal to make her a heroine was very successful. There are a number of schools named after her, which is interesting because to go to those schools and be a kid, and it's wow, is my school? My school's named after the chocolates, I would think. Beaver Dams, where there's the Battle of Beaver Dams, Battlefield Park, has a plaque dedicated to Laura Secord. And in 1992, there was a Laura Secord commemorative stamp. In 2003, Laura Secord was declared a person of national historical significance by the Minister of Canadian Heritage. And in 2006, there was a statue of Laura Secord, was one of 14 statues dedicated at the Valiance Memorial in Ottawa. In 2013, to commemorate the 200th anniversary of her walk, Laura Secord's image was put on a quarter by the Royal Canadian Mint and a postage stamp as well. And that is the saga of Laura Secord. And on my regular episodes of Vulgar History, I have a scoring scale where I have different categories and I measure the women we talk about and how do they score in various categories. And with a friend of mine who's also a fan of Canadian history, we came up with a specific scale for these Canadian episodes to score them in various Canadian categories. And the first category is called ananas, which is the French word for pineapple. And if you grew up on the east coast of Canada, then you would have in your French class watched a series of videos called Télé Français, which taught you about how to speak French and were hosted by a pineapple puppet called Ananas, which actually, if you're a fan of Ananas and you remember that at all, first of all, that's in the image of this Vulgar History, Canadian history, but also there's a company out of Toronto called Retro Kid, and they have some licensed Ananas merchandise at the moment. Anyway, so the first category is called Ananas, and that means, does this story involve more than one language? And I think barely. I think almost everybody in the story is speaking English, except for the Mohawk Scouts were there as well, but I feel like Laura Secord spoke English to them. So I'm going to give this, on a scale of 1 to 10, I'm going to give this a I'm going to give this a 1 out of 10 for Anana. Like, it's mostly just an English language story. But the next category is called CanCon. And CanCon is the official term that's used for Canadian content. All of our television stations, our radio stations, there's a certain amount of, like, you need to play a certain amount of Canadian musical artists on the radio. You need to, on television, you have to have a certain amount of Canadian produced television. This is why there's some songs that became huge hits in Canada that people in other countries, I realize now, have never heard, but that's because you have to play Canadian music here all the time. So CanCon, did Laura Secord inspire a TV show, a movie, a special podcast series? And I'm going to say not that I'm aware of. I know that we'll get to the Canadian Heritage Minute in a separate category, but I don't think there's a TV show, movie, or podcast specifically about her, but there should be. So I'm going to give her a 1 out of 10 in that as well. The next category is just called Heritage, like Canadian Heritage Minutes. Was Laura Secord honored with a stamp? Was she put on a commemorative coin? Is there a Canadian Heritage Minute about her? Like, those are the 3 major ways that Canadian Heritage, is there a statue about her? Is there a portrait of her in Parliament? I feel like she gets 10 out of 10 for this because she has, yes, all of those things. She has been commemorated in every way that a heroine can be commemorated in Canada. There's schools named after her. But I mean, to get the trifecta of stamp, Heritage Minute, and coin, I think is pretty elite of her. And the final category is called Trans-Canada. We have, in Canada, there's the Trans-Canada Highway, which you can drive to go from coast to coast of Canada. And so for Trans-Canada, does this mean I'm going to give 1 point for every province and or territory that was mentioned in this story? But she spent her whole life in, I guess she was born in the US, which doesn't count for this. And then she was in Upper Canada, which is now Ontario. So that's just one. That's just one. So on the total score, and she's the first inaugural person to be measured on this, I don't know what we'll call it, like the Celine Dion Memorial Canadian Heritage scoring scale. So she's got a score of 13, which, sure, Taylor Swift's favorite number. It's a good number. It's auspicious for this whole situation. Anyway, I'm hoping to do one of these Canadian history episodes, maybe like 1 a month or something like that. They're going to always be a bit shorter than the regular Vulgar History episodes. And that's partially because there's not that much information about a lot of the Canadian people that I want to talk about. But if you want to stay up with this podcast, make sure that you're subscribed and wherever you listen to your podcasts. And you can also follow me on various social media at Vulgar History. And yeah, if you want to stay super up to date, I also have a Patreon where if you pay $1 a month, Canadian, whatever that turns into in other currencies, you can get early ad-free access to all episodes of Vulgar History, including the Canadian Heritage Minutes. Anyway, until next time, keep your elbows up and your tits out. Vulgar History is researched, scripted, and hosted by Ann Foster. That's me. Editor is Christina Lumagi. Theme music is by the Severin Duo. Transcripts of this podcast are available at vulgarhistory.com by Aveline Malik. You can get early, ad-free episodes of Vulgar History by becoming a paid member of our Patreon for as low as $1 a month at patreon.com/AnnFosterWriter. Vulgar History merchandise is available at vulgarhistory.com/store for Americans, and for everyone else at vulgarhistory.redbubble.com. Follow us on social media at Vulgar History Pod, and get in touch with me via email at vulgarhistorypod@gmail.com.
Can you actually change your personality if you want to? How does peer pressure work, and why is it so powerful? Should you ever really trust your gut when you make a big decision? These are just a few of the topics we've recently covered on my podcast, Something You Should Know. I'm the host, Mike Carruthers, and each episode of Something You Should Know covers multiple topics that are likely relevant to you. You'll discover things you can use in your life today, right now, like how to have a great conversation, how to be more courageous, the anatomy of the perfect apology, and much, much more. To date, there are over 1,000 episodes of Something You Should Know, and we've gotten over 4,000 mostly 5-star reviews. I invite you to check out Something You Should Know. Look for the bright yellow light bulb on the blue background. Something You Should Know, wherever you listen to podcasts.
The Old West is an iconic period of American history and full of legendary figures whose names still resonate today, like Jesse James, Billy the Kid, and Butch and Sundance, Sitting Bull, Crazy Horse, and Geronimo, Wyatt Earp, Bat Masterson, and Bass Reeves, Buffalo Bill Cody, Wild Bill Hickok, the Texas Rangers, and many more. Hear all their stories on the Legends of the Old West podcast. We'll take you to Tombstone, Deadwood, and Dodge City, to the plains, mountains, and deserts for battles between the U.S. Army and Native American warriors, to dark corners for the disaster of the Donner Party, and shining summits for achievements like the Transcontinental Railroad. We'll go back to the earliest days of explorers and mountain men, and head up through notorious Pinkerton agents and gunmen like Tom Horn. Every episode features narrative writing and cinematic music, and there are hundreds of episodes available to binge. I'm Chris Wimmer. Find Legends of the Old West wherever you're listening now.
You might think you know fairy tales, and you might think that they are cute and sweet and boring. But the real Grimm fairy tales were not cute at all. They were very dark, and they were often very grim. On Grim, Grimmer, Grimmest, we tell a Grimm fairy tale to a bunch of kids. Perfect for car rides or screen-free entertainment, Grim, Grimmer, Grimmest activates kids' imaginations and instigates fun conversations. Because fairy tales speak to all of us at a very deep, primal level, and they raise interesting topics and questions that are worth chewing over together as a family. Every episode is rated Grim, Grimmer, or Grimmest, so you, your kids, your whole family can choose what is the right level of grim for you. Though, if you're listening with Grandma, she's just gonna go for Grimmest. Trust me on this one. Tune in to Grim, Grimmer, Grimmest, and our new season, available now.